So we did talk about this earlier on in the year, how the Vancouver Canucks and the Pittsburgh Penguins apparently had a trade offer on the table that was really close to getting pulled off. It's just, we had a few roadblocks in the way. This would have seen JT Miller, Vancouver Canucks forward, $8 million guy by 7 years, over the next 7 years after turning 30 years old earlier this season, head over to Pittsburgh in a package that would have seen the Vancouver Canucks reportedly get multiple first-round picks in return. There were a few conversations and contentions about what the return would have been, but essentially JT Miller, for all intents and purposes, was almost a Penguin this year. This would have been a pretty good scenario for Miller the guy, not because he's from East Palestine, Ohio, but because he did grow up in the Pittsburgh area. He is connected there in Pennsylvania, so this would have been some sort of a homecoming, quote-unquote, for Miller. And for a team like Pittsburgh that is still trying to remain competitive, that is still trying to win championships with Crosby, Malkin, and Letang, adding a guy like Miller who is good right now, even though it screws over part of your future because you would have to trade away some picks and you would be committing yourself to a huge contract over the next 7 years, it would have been okay. Because if you could give Crosby, Malkin, Letang, all these guys their one last shot at greatness, Miller is a player that helps you do that this year. However, we know the trade did not go down. Miller is still a Vancouver Canuck. He's competing at the US Open qualifiers, or at least he was. And now we had ourselves the in media res sort of flashback trade conversations popping up here and there from NHL analysts that are saying, yeah, Miller was almost a Penguin. We almost saw the trade go down. Jason Zucker was almost involved in it too, Pittsburgh Penguins forward. And with all the hindsight included, it's easy to go out there and take a look at what could have been and analyze it from a summer's perspective after the entire season wrapped up. The reason we're bringing this up entirely again is because earlier this morning we had ourselves an article published by Josh Yohei on The Athletic, a behind-the-scenes look at the final chaotic days of the Ron Hextall era. The article will be linked in the description. It's titled Chaos, Loathing, and the Big Three, How the Penguins Unraveled. And, I mean, look, it doesn't take a genius to acknowledge what this is about. It's about the Penguins, it's about Ron Hextall, it's about what happened with this team. And in the piece, and this is not me going out there and screenshotting The Athletic, this is taking a look at what Lachlan Irvin posted, because he posted pretty much the essential part of this article on Twitter. This is what it says regarding JT Miller and the Vancouver Canucks. Some more details about the potential Pittsburgh trade. The article is linked in the description if you want to go ahead and read the entire thing, but the little excerpt about Miller says this. Hextall flirted with the idea of adding Vancouver forward JT Miller, a Pittsburgh area native who recorded 99 points the previous year in a 3-team trade. But the Penguins would have lost Jason Zucker in the deal, a non-starter for an infuriated Mike Sullivan, and a move that would have clashed with Fenway Sports Group's judgment that it couldn't justify Miller's massive contract extension from a business perspective. And so this builds off of what we had heard prior, that there was this trade idea that Miller was potentially going to the Penguins, that they were going to lose out on Zucker, and that the Canucks would maybe get those two firsts. But, of course, this article now is not saying anything about what the Canucks would have received. It's more talking about why the Penguins did not go through with it. But based off of everything we had learned prior, it was apparent that this trade idea was really close to getting pulled off. It's apparent that we now know why it was so close but just did not get done. The Penguins' coaching staff, Mike Sullivan, they would not have wanted this move. Why? Well, because they really like Jason Zucker. And you had Fenway Sports Group's judgment that they couldn't justify doing this trade because Miller's massive contract just did not work from a business point of view. And so, from all of this, it's very apparent that had there not been any external interference from the coaching, from the ownership, Ron Hextall might have just gone out there and done it. 3-team trade, JT Miller to Pittsburgh, and the Canucks maybe getting a first or two, maybe a first from Pittsburgh and maybe a first from the other team that is involved in this. The other team gets Zucker and they send their first to Vancouver. Who really knows if that's how it works out? Honestly, you could take a whole bunch of these moves that the Vancouver Canucks have made and not made and compile a list of what-ifs that had you just done things a little bit differently, the entire Canucks draft capital situation in the 2023 draft would be so drastically different. What if the Vancouver Canucks did not make the Hronek trade and they kept that Islanders first? They would have had 2 first-round picks somewhere in the top 20. What if they did not just start winning games. What if they traded Miller away earlier? They grabbed 2 firsts. Miller does not go on a heater to end off the year, and as a result, the Canucks don't win as much as they do. They don't draft 11th and wherever the Islanders end up picking. They draft, 7th overall. Plus the Islanders pick, plus 2 extra firsts they would have received for Miller, because Miller is good enough to maybe win you a few hockey games down the road, which is what the Canucks ended up getting. This series of what-ifs could have drastically changed the way the Vancouver Canucks drafted in 2023, but of course I could understand that from the perspective of Patrick Allvin, Rutherford, they have a guy already in Miller that is very talented. They wanted to get rid of him because of the contract, and this is a team that on paper, just looking at the talent and the potential of these guys today, they are good enough to justify saying, okay, they could be a playoff contender, they could be a wild card contender, they could maybe make the dance. It's not an irrational thought process. It's just from the consistency, from the coaching, from all the stuff we had seen, it was not really something to fully believe in, especially when you watch this team perform at the start of the year. Sure, the talent on paper was there, but they weren't playing like a team that was destined to make a push for the wild card. It's just they started winning games at the end of the year when their schedule was easier, when the games didn't matter as much anymore, and that's the rinse and repeat sort of Vancouver Canucks pattern. I'm just kind of intrigued into thinking about what could have been had the Canucks been able to make that JT Miller move, get a few extra firsts, have Miller go over to Pittsburgh. Maybe the Penguins make the playoffs. Who really knows? If JT Miller is on the Penguins and they have that final game against Chicago go differently, then the Penguins would have been in the playoffs, everything would have been different, and now Connor Bedard may not have gone to Chicago. So, who really knows? There's an entire domino effect, butterfly effect that turns into a tornado from that final game that we're going to talk about later on, but not in this video. I just kind of wanted to focus on JT. We will do it, though. Like, believe me, I do have plans to go out there and talk about the most important game of the year, Pittsburgh-Chicago, game number 82. But getting back over to Vancouver, I'm kind of intrigued as to seeing what the options are right now, because for JT, I mean, we know his contract, $8 million by 7 years per season. It kicks in 2023, 2024. But for the small window of time before everything transitions properly, Miller still has the opportunity to get traded. His no-move clause doesn't kick in until the contract actually starts, that in which it has not done so yet. So if the Canucks really wanted to get this done, you just gotta find the right team, dude. And it's gonna be difficult because it's not only you needing to find the right team, but you need to find the team that is willing to take the bullet and that is actually believing they're doing a good thing. All these other teams in the NHL know the Canucks are strapped for cap. They all know that they've got too many wingers, they've got too many guys that are kind of filling the same role. You got the Bessers, the Garlands, the Kuzmenkos, the Mikheyevs, the Beauvilliers, the Pearsons, the Millers. There are too many guys on this team that are making significant money, plus the defense, OEL, Myers, you know the drill. Everybody knows the Canucks are strapped for cap. So if you wanted to trade away Miller to a team, you need to find a team that actually wants to get Miller, not because they're going out there doing the Canucks a solid, but because they think they're winning the trade. And for the Penguins, it's apparent that Ron Hextall was interested in it. He wanted Miller for his team, but the coaching staff was like, yeah, we don't want to lose Zucker, that guy's too valuable. And then the ownership was like, yeah, we can't justify paying Miller that amount of money till he's 37 years old. So talk in the comments about your thoughts about this entire idea. The more details, the better. All the stuff that we had discussed when it comes to Miller and the idea of him getting traded over to Pittsburgh, heading back home, over to Pennsylvania. What are your thoughts about the new things that we had learned about this, how the coaching staff and ownership each had separate opinions about this trade that sort of aligned in the same way, they just didn't want to do it, and how Ron Hextall was ultimately blocked from getting this trade done in the first place. Thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.